Thanks for staying with us. This is Planet Green Trees, episode 196. Today's April 24th. We're going to continue on with our unadulterated, informative, and up-to-date information on the medical cannabis and cannabis reform. And joining us, as promised, Kris Hermes, media liaison for Americans for Safe Access. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Kris?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. We always are fascinated. We had a couple lawyers on a little while ago talking about Michigan case now that's got, it's being federalized. Medical marijuana in Michigan gone wrong, one might say. At the same time, we have the Department of Justice, publicly announcing a clemency program. And what is really going on at the federal level? Can you give us some insight?
I wish I could tell you what the motivations and the reasons for the actions of the federal government, and it just seems to vary depending on where you are. I think since the Cole memorandum in was it August of last year, we've seen maybe a slowdown in criminal enforcement out of the Justice Department, but there is still enforcement going on. This case in Western Michigan is an example of that. I was hoping to say a few words about a case in Eastern Washington, a rural part of northeastern Washington by the Columbia River, where a family is being prosecuted, family of people who are all patients. 4 out of the 5 are all family members, and they're being prosecuted for growing their own medicine. And it's a rare occasion, admittedly, when the federal government goes after individual patients. But this is an example and really a stark contradiction to what the Obama administration and the Bush administration before it has said about targeting individual patients. So I can say a few more words about that, but essentially, depending on where you live, even parts of California, in Northern California, the Bay Area, the U.S. Attorney is continuing to go after the property of the landlords of some of the oldest and largest dispensaries in the country. That's still going on. Yet you can be in another part of the country where dispensaries are operating, even in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. There have been no raids, thank God, and hopefully there won't be. But it's definitely a case-by-case approach, it seems, by the federal government. But it is continuing to terrorize the medical marijuana community, have no doubt about that. And in addition to the raids and prosecutions that we're talking about, the federal government has engaged in not justice, but the IRS in auditing what we believe are hundreds of dispensaries in California and other states.
Well, as you were describing, the disparity or inconsistencies of how the states, the feds are handling state to state or even jurisdiction to jurisdiction, as I was listening to, Dan and John talk about the Western District and how this has gone bad, I reported on a case that I was involved in last year, and it was August, because I remember when that memo came out where my clients who were charged, there were allegedly 600 or 800 plants, medical marijuana patients and caregivers, but there were, variations of clones and sizes and not what it sounds like, of course, but still, arguably outside of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, and started out with a mandatory minimum charge, and then the same week that the U.S. Attorney made that announcement I think it was in San Francisco at the time in August, at the end of that week, we got a note from the U.S. Attorney that was handling our case saying that they were going to drop the mandatory minimum. Now, they still had a guideline that allowed for up to 20 years, and the court had full-on discretion, and sentencing guidelines were they're discretionary, and we just happen to draw a good judge who, took it upon himself to do what he thought was right. A lot of the federal judges, I think that this varies. Like, this is kind of what we're talking about, depending on their political background. They're either gonna use their discretion to think, do what they think is right because they're a judge and that's their job, or, they're going to be. A lot of judges don't like, mandatory anything. Like, they like to have the power to judge and evaluate each individual case. So, but John and Dan were talking about, they've got their judges, their political appointments of, harsher, a different time, and they're not going to use their discretion. They're going to use the guidelines and sentence within them, which involve mandatory minimums. I mean, I guess I'm making the same thing happens in Michigan too. There's areas where people are getting brutalized, and other places where people are having, very pleasant and positive, Section 4 immunity interactions with law enforcement. I mean, I don't know, when does it end? What's the plan from this point forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. Just to paint another, stark picture of what the federal government is doing, and how different it is from one district to the other. In California, where there's 4 U.S. attorneys, four districts in the federal court system, and after the Cole memorandum came out in August 2013. The U.S. Attorney in the Central District, where Los Angeles is located, withdrew all of the pending lawsuits against landlords of dispensaries. The federal government had been on the attack, had filed as many as more than 24, actually, lawsuits to seize the property of landlords that were leasing to dispensaries in order to get them to shut down. The U.S. Attorney withdrew all those cases in the Central District. In the Northern District, U.S. Attorney Melinda Haig has continued to prosecute those seizure lawsuits, asset forfeiture lawsuits, to this day. So it's bizarre, it's surreal, and I try and figure it out.
Let's get about this. We are hearing very positive things, I guess. That's what the media has been reporting on. And of Colorado, I know that, previous years they experienced that IRS audit. And I don't know that all of them were shut down. They were penalized. But, it was a recognition to a certain extent of the federal government accepting tax dollars, giving benefits, giving deductions for businesses that were, marijuana related, and receiving tax dollars on it at the same time. And there was punishments and whatnot, but it was a recognized situation. I've been hearing a lot of grumblings with the, rumor mostly, but that the federal government is not happy with Washington State. I know you referenced that one family, but while it's legalized for adults 21 and older, they did not have the evolution of what could be described as an overly regulated system like Colorado. They really didn't have anything like that. And are they in a weaker position, and should we be expecting raids in Washington State soon, do you think?
Well, so Washington State has been plagued by raids for a number of years, and there's a political game going on all over the country, but in Washington in particular. 3 years ago, the legislature in Washington passed a bill that would have licensed distribution. At the time, the governor didn't want to sign the bill that included those licensing provisions, and sought an opinion from the U.S. Attorney, who said that basically you'd be breaking federal law by doing this, and your own state employees would be at risk potentially, or at least will enjoin you from implementing such a program. So she vetoed it, and Washington has been without a licensing program ever since. That was 2011. For the next 3 years, and they just again failed to pass legislation, unfortunately, and so another year goes by. Whether we can place the blame on the federal government chilling that kind of activity or the state legislature, who's to tell? But we do have a regulatory quagmire, unfortunately, in Washington State that the federal government has exploited. Colorado is a different story. It has more of its regulatory apparatus figured out. But none of this should empower or require the federal government to interfere in the activity. I think that the Washington State, even though it may be slow at designing regulations, and I might add that to some extent Michigan is facing some of the same issues, that they should be left alone to figure out the laws themselves and should be allowed to enforce those laws themselves without the federal government flexing its muscle and again chilling that kind of activity.
Jamie wants to ask you a question, but correct me. Historically, the reason why that dispensary bill was on the governor's desk was a result of the 2009 Obama administration's announcement at that time that they are not going to interfere with state-regulated medical marijuana activity, which then, not just Washington State, but many other states began a legislative process of coming up with comprehensive legislation for dispensaries. Like almost in response, thousands of dollars, I'm sure, wasted on work groups and law, officers' hours in terms of having their input, what have you. And they produced this bill, and then the U.S. attorney says, if you sign that, we're going to start prosecuting the state employees who we just told you it would be okay to do that. I mean, that's the history behind it, right? And then here Washington,
it's an example of the surreal, schizophrenic type of activity you find with the federal government on this issue. So James Cole, the U.S. Deputy Attorney General, his predecessor, David Ogden, Deputy Attorney General David Ogden, issued a memo, as you said, in 2009, I think it was October of that year, and it essentially said that we're going to de-emphasize enforcement of medical marijuana cases in states where it's legal, and it did lead to several states adopting. Fortunately, in other states, amendments to existing laws were adopted that incorporated dispensary licensing programs. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in Washington State. But I think, in my estimation, an announcement was made, and people started to take advantage of the federal flexibility that appeared to be on the horizon, and the federal government freaked out and realized that a Pandora's box was opening, and tried to shut it very clumsily. And awkwardly and harmfully, but we saw ensuing crackdowns in California, really horrendous enforcement practices going on all over the country.
Other governors had the same dilemma. Some of them struck portions of the language before they signed it. Some of them said, "Screw you, federal government. We're going to do what we want to do." Colorado was one of those, right? I mean, they had the same. All of these states that had comprehensive over the years, were anyways. But go ahead, Jamie. I'm sorry. I just said I was going to ask one question. But
right, and we do have to kind of move on to Jeff Hank in a second. But just a couple things real quick, maybe to wrap up, and that is if you want to throw a few more words in about the situation in Washington State that you brought up earlier, and the other is from what you know of the announcement about the clemency issue by the federal government. If our people here, Lansing 7, the Duvals, if there's anything they may look forward to due to this policy change based on your knowledge of those cases.
Sure. Well, the case in Northeast Washington by the Columbia River is being called the Kettle Falls 5 for the small town that's nearby where the cultivation was and where the raid occurred. It's the home of Larry Harvey and his wife, Rhonda Firestack Harvey. Larry's 70 years old and Rhonda's 55, and Rhonda's son and daughter-in-law were also growing on their property, as was a friend of the family. So they're all qualified patients. They were all just growing for themselves. It was a total of 44 plants. It's less than 9 each. And originally it was a state warrant. The group was growing, I believe, 72 plants or just over 70 plants, and a state law enforcement official came by with a federal agent and got them to cut down 20-some of their plants down to 44, so that they were, quote-unquote, in compliance with state law, although they had been in compliance with the 70-some plants that they were previously growing. For some reason, they cut down a portion of their plants. And then a week later, the feds came back and raided them, cut all their plants down, seized a bunch of other property, arrested them, put Larry and the others in jail, denied him medical attention, and as I said, seized a bunch of their property, including firearms, which they charged them with, which, as you guys know, carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in prison. They aggregated what they're accusing them of is cultivating multiple years and aggregating those crop numbers to bring them up from 44 to over 100. They have flimsy evidence of this, but they're trying to get another mandatory minimum, which is more than 100 plants, conspiracy to manufacture more than 100 plants. So all of this is going on when the Obama administration is basically saying that using Justice Department resources is not efficient when prosecuting seriously ill individuals, and that's exactly what they're doing here. So we're trying to bring attention to this case. We just had a pretrial hearing this past Tuesday and Wednesday, and we're awaiting a ruling. Several motions to dismiss and motions to suppress. And the trial is scheduled for May 12th, less than a month away. So this is a unique situation. You rarely have cases that go to trial. Most of these cases plead out because patients don't have a defense in federal court. They can't show medical necessity, and they can't prove that they were in compliance with state law. It's all irrelevant. So you see most of these cases pleading out, but these folks are going to trial next month. It should be interesting, and stay tuned for more on this. We're trying to drum up attention on their case. And with regard to clemency, it's an interesting point that hundreds, if not thousands, of people will be potentially released from prison by Obama's actions, compassionate clemency actions. Unfortunately, it does not appear that any of our people, any of the medical marijuana prisoners, POWs that are languishing in prison right now are on that list. So we're going to continue to push the Obama administration to do the right thing in their in all of those cases. But so far, we've still got work to do.
Yes, we do. Such a schizophrenic world right now. There's so many different moving parts. It's hard to
huge
make any
waste
sense
of
of it.
resources.
Yeah, really
massive.
is.
And a mixed message to America.
Well, it's a lie. I think it's a lie. It's really dishonest. I think we should come on. I want to get you back. And I think we started to talk about this at the end of another show, but just about the next generations and how they're going to be taught about marijuana, medical marijuana. How does that transformation take place? So we don't, we can start eliminating the insanity that still exists by just breeding it out. As the generations, because in that next generation is where the sanity will come from. But how does that transition take place? I guess. But anyways, listen, it's a great topic as always. You're very informative, and always enjoyed talking to you. And thanks for calling in.
Thanks for having me.
All right, have a
Take
good
care
night.
and good luck. Okay, bye-bye.
Well, let's see. We're trying and looking for. I don't know that.
Jeff Hank.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know that same Alexander. I do not semi-am. Any confirmation? Let's take a quick break and come right back.
Please welcome
Planet Greenpeace.